Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the 18-hour show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this edition, we are going to direct that hard look at an issue that not many would agree can or should in fact be seen purely through an economic lens. We are going to take a dispassionate look, as only economists can, at prohibition. Is the road to prohibition, like the road to hell, paved with good intentions alone? With Bihar going ahead and banning sale of liquor following an election promise, and the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister promising to do likewise if she is re-elected. In this edition of Macros with Mythili, we are going to examine the case for or against prohibition, purely through an economic lens. Many would argue that as with many issues in macroeconomics with social overtones, we really can't look at an issue like prohibition in silos. But that's equally true, say, of subsidies. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so looking at the economics of prohibition with a panel of experts. M Govinda Rao, former director of the Delhi-based fiscal think tank, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and member of the 14th Finance Commission, and Zakia Soman, a well-known activist who's done grassroots work with women's groups and has a fair insight into not only the social cost, but also the economic cost of addiction to drink. Welcome to the show, Govind and Zakia. Let me start by asking each of you in turn the question that I started off with. Is it naive or realistic to even try and look at an issue like prohibition through the lens of a subject as dry as economics? After all, one of the first assumptions of economics is that human beings are rational, and the sad fact is that there's nothing very rational about the decision to buy a drink. It costs good money, and after a brief high leaves the imbiber with a hangover and risks long-term damage to his or her liver. Let me start by asking you, Govind, can you look at prohibition purely through an economic lens?
Well, it's difficult to look at it through economic lens alone. But the basic issue is that, even when you levy very heavy taxes on that, it is supposed to regulate consumption. And so it's a sort of a sumptuary levy. But over a period of time, what happens is that it becomes a lucrative way of raising revenue and easy way of raising revenue, and therefore many states will hesitate to move towards prohibition, and even some of those who moved to prohibition actually retracted from there and then actually abolished prohibition, as we have seen in the past.
Zakia, Govind says it's difficult to look at it purely through an economic lens, but then he talks about revenue, and economics, as we know, deals with money. So let me toss that question to you. Can one look at prohibition purely through an economic lens, or must one necessarily look at it as a socio-political economic issue?
I think the economic part of it is definitely true, but it's a much larger social reality that we need to consider here. And if you take a case study from the life of a family which is affected by alcoholism, and you look at the expenditure by the pattern of the family, and the wastage that the family has to incur by way of spending it on the man's alcoholism, and the subsequent denial of health facilities, the denial of education to the children. So I think it's a much more stark social reality which needs to be considered.
Okay, so Zakia says it's a social reality and one needs to look at that aspect also. But Govind, the fact is that despite the fairly compelling case, at least on paper, for prohibition, especially in a country as poor as ours, where addiction to drink has a high social and economic cost, why is it that state governments have not been able to stand firm and impose prohibition? Is it because, as you said, because of the huge amount of revenue raised by state governments? Tamil Nadu, for instance, raised as much as 21,681 crores in 2013, a close to 20% hike from the previous year. And mind you, Tamil Nadu is not an exception. Haryana too has seen double-digit growth in revenues from liquor. And all this is apart from the money that comes from related advertising, event sponsorship, travel, tourism, sports, etc. Even assuming that liquor is a major contributor to state coffers across the board, shouldn't governments also be concerned with how the revenue is raised instead of focusing only on the quantum alone? We've heard of ethical investment, so why not ethical taxation? Govind, you're a tax expert, so why not ethical taxation?
Well, when you come to tax, you forget ethics anyway. Because they say that taxes death are inevitable.
That's a very damaging statement, Govind.
And therefore no, in fact, taxes like death are inevitable, and therefore you need to levy the taxes. It's as simple as that. But anyway, the point is that there is a huge revenue cost. In fact, Bihar, for example, is likely to lose about 6 to 7,000 crores of rupees. And for a very poor state like Bihar, it is much, a very significant amount. I mean, they are not even able to, sort of put money for a bridge across Ganga, which is a much more important thing. And, I mean, there is also one other, I mean, of course, in Tamil Nadu, it's more than 21,000 crores. See, in addition to the revenue from excise, you also get, in many of the states, there is a separate sales tax raised on this. So you have huge revenue cost. Now, the question is, even in the past, there have been a lot of ethical issues. In fact, Sri Rajagopalachari levied, sort of introduced prohibition in, composite state of Madras, which had to be given up in 1952. And, you had the situation of Morarji Desai imposing it in the composite state of Bombay, which included both Gujarat and Maharashtra. And then and then of course Morarji, as soon as there was a bifurcation, Gujarat continued with the prohibition, but Maharashtra gave it up. And then you have the case of Andhra Pradesh, which introduced it in 2004, and then, sort of Chandrababu Naidu came and, 1994, and Chandrababu Naidu came and said that it is unworkable. See, in an economy where you have open borders, where there is so much of bootlegging that goes on, where you have a complicit police, you are unable to regulate. In fact, if you are able to regulate it, if you are able to enforce it, I think one should go in for it, and there is no reason why we should not. But the point is, there is no incentive for anybody to enforce anything, and in the process, we have created alcoholism, sort of complicit police, bootlegging, and all sorts of deaths on account of spurious liquor and the like. Now, I am not for one moment say that you should promote alcohol, but the basic issue is, like cigarettes, alcohol, in fact, there is one of the things that has happened is that any revenue that you raise from alcohol and cigarettes is basically raised from poor people, quite a lot of it. That's why there is an interesting piece, an article by Charles McClure, which says inequity of taxing inequity. So we have a serious problem here. It's a dilemma, and I think if one is able to enforce it, one should go about. But unfortunately, the record has not been good, even in Gujarat.
Okay. Govind, you spoke about the problems of implementation, and we'll come to that a little later. But if I can just ask you, you said that governments raise a huge amount of revenue from liquor, but it's the same in the case of cigarettes. But the government has been able to kind of come down on cigarette consumption, tobacco consumption, even though there was a revenue loss. So what is it about alcohol that sets it apart from tobacco? Both are sin goods. And if the government is able to ensure that cigarette smoking should be curtailed, including by banning cigarette smoking in public, what is so special about alcohol? After all, you have money riding on cigarette consumption as well.
No, there is nothing special about alcohol, but then you have not banned cigarette smoking. You have banned it in smoking in the public. But here you are trying to basically say that, no alcohol should be produced, stored or consumed. And when you say that, and then you are unable to enforce it.
Okay. Zakia, Govind spoke about the high contribution to the state exchequer from liquor and how that makes governments very reluctant to do anything that will impact liquor consumption. But isn't that a very short-sighted way of looking at finances? Because it is a huge cost also to the state exchequer once again from liquor consumption. There is a cost of domestic violence. Studies have shown a clear link between domestic violence and alcohol consumption, of broken homes and of healthcare costs, because the category of people who typically get addicted to liquor are often those who are dependent on public healthcare facilities. Unfortunately, these costs are seldom measured because it's so hard to measure. So is it possible really for us to do a proper cost-benefit analysis purely in economic terms?
You very rightly said the cost of alcoholism, if we count the cost to the family and to the community, and thereby, how it affects nation building. It affects what kind of citizens we are going to have tomorrow, because there have been a number of studies which, have evidence that an alcoholic father comes home every evening and beats up the mother, and the kind of role model such a father provides to the children, either there are cases where children have gone into huge depression and trauma. There are cases of young boys repeating the same kind of domestic violence vis-a-vis their girlfriends, and later on when they marry. So quite huge immeasurable kind of costs to a society and to nation building. Even in simple terms, even when we look at the income of a family, and we also have to take into account, especially in the lower socio-economic stratas of our society, lots of women are workers in the informal sector, and they are contributing to the informal sector economy. They are also contributing to their families, and in so many cases where the husband is an alcoholic, it's the woman. We don't refer to it as a woman-headed household because the husband is very much there. But when it comes to bearing the living expenses of the family, it is the woman who is providing for that. So, and studies suggest that left to herself, first and foremost, a woman spends on food. This is followed by spending on
children's education.
Medical facilities and children's education. Now, if you take a case study of a family where the husband is an alcoholic, the kind of violence that the family is subjected to, quite apart from the domestic violence that the wife is subjected to, it also amounts to the husband snatching away whatever little money that the woman has earned through her hard labor and putting it, to buy liquor for himself, and thereby denying the children the education, the health care, the entire family, the opportunity to live with dignity. Now, if we calculate the costs to the economy, the cost to the society, the cost to the nation on these lines, then it will be really, really immeasurable. And the kind of, violence it perpetuates in a family and in the neighborhood. And the Gujarat, because I belong to Gujarat, and we have always had prohibition.
Yeah, I'm just going to come to the issue of Gujarat and ask you about that. But I think the problem really, Zakia, is that while the revenues to the government are measurable, the costs, as you have mentioned, are not measurable. It's a bit like the unpaid work of a woman in the house. It just doesn't get measured, so it's considered as being negligible or zero. So it's similarly, I think the issue with alcoholism, prohibition, etc. is that it's easy to measure the revenues, the costs are much more difficult to measure, so nobody does the measurement at all. And that is why governments are reluctant perhaps to go in with prohibition. But I'm afraid on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're trying to debate the economic cost of prohibition, the case for or against, with Govind and Zakia. Govind, before the break we were talking about how governments are, they like the money that they get from liquor, and that is why perhaps they're reluctant to do it. But part of the problem really is about, why prohibition becomes an issue is because the poor track record of states in the area of prohibition, essentially because of poor design where only certain kinds of drink are prohibited, and implementation is a huge issue. So does the answer really lie in better design and improved implementation, or is it a bad idea ab initio?
Let me at the outset say that, if you are able to really enforce prohibition, and sort of regulate consumption of the alcohol, particularly the bad varieties of alcohol, I think there is nothing wrong in having sort of that. But unfortunately, our record of enforcing prohibition has not been very good, number one. I understand that there is a huge cost to the family, cost to the society, cost in terms of the domestic violence, and we do understand that. But the point is that we have, even in Gujarat, they have not been able to avoid that sort of a thing because bootlegging is, sort of enormously prevalent there. It's not easily available, so they spend more money. And in open, sort of economies of the states, there is a lot of movement across, of this alcohol across states. And then the neighboring states gain enormously. People go there and people travel or bring in. Anyway, these are some of the things. Interesting part of it that I don't know how much politicians are serious about the entire issue of prohibition.
Yes, that really is the point.
They start. That is critical issue because it's only during the election time they wake up. If you have seen in the past, whether it is Morarji Desai or Rajagopalachari, they really meant it. They really wanted to do it, and they wanted the good people to come in, and they wanted to bring in ethical values in public policy. That's fine. But I mean, today the politicians, when they are doing it, basically it is some sort of a vote-catching device. I mean, women, particularly in rural areas, having been tortured with the system, think that, prohibition is going to be their solace. And obviously they actually, that's one of the ways in which, at least that is how the politicians think. And once they make a promise, like the way this Nitish Kumar did, they want to show that they have done it and they are serious about it. Now, to what extent this is going to improve the economy of Bihar, how it is going to deal with the entire thing has to be seen. I think it's a good case study can be done in terms of the cost and benefits in Bihar as we go along. It's a good laboratory in that sense of the term.
Oh,
but,
yes.
I mean, why is it that the politicians think about this only during election time? That's basically the question. So I do think that, sort of regulating consumption is important. I do think that you should not allow bad alcohol to be consumed by people, and if you really don't want them to allow them to bad alcohol, prohibition is not the solution to that, because bootlegging will be a major problem, and we are going to see, I'm worried that it's going to see much more, there will be a much more incidence of bootlegging and then death on account of spurious liquor as we go along.
Well, absolutely, that's true. But then if the government really wishes and if the politicians really wish, they can do better enforcement, Govind, as you yourselves agreed. In fact, Zakia, you talked about being from Gujarat, and you said that's a state which has persisted with prohibition, perhaps only on paper going by various reports. But even so, what is it that is different about Gujarat compared to other states that has enabled it to persist? Can prohibition succeed in select states? What is there to stop tipplers from going to adjoining states? And I'm sure it happens in the case of Gujarat also. But despite the loss of revenue, Gujarat has persisted, and it is still one of the relatively more developed states in the country. So clearly the loss of revenue has not cost the average Gujarati very much. So what is it about Gujarat that has enabled that state to go ahead and stick with that prohibition?
One simple fact is that Mahatma Gandhi belongs to Gujarat, and at least his state needs to uphold prohibition. So yeah, that's something that we all believe in. I must also say that Gujarat, growing up in Gujarat, I have always found it a very safe and secure place as a girl and as a woman. Of course, now things are changing, but now things are changing world over and all over the country. But it has, that kind of a safety has been there in Gujarat.
But what about the loss of revenue? Did that not bother the government?
Yeah, there has been a whole, bootlegging economy. And according to the media estimates and estimates of some experts, it's anywhere between 2,500 to 3,000 crores
but the government does not get revenue from that.
The government does not get revenue from there.
So the loss of revenue would have hurt the government?
Yeah, so that revenue, instead of coming to the government and coming to the public, is going elsewhere. So that's a matter for interest and investigation for some development economists also. But the fact remains that we are a state surrounded by states where there is no prohibition. Within Gujarat also we have union territory areas like Diu, and like nearby Surat there is this place called Dadra Nagar Haveli. So where again the liquor is freely available, and Gujaratis, quite a few of the Gujaratis, they enjoy the liquor. See, a lot depends on which socio-economic strata we are talking about. When we talk about the middle classes and the upper classes, then it becomes a matter of choice, it becomes a matter of freedom of the individual to be able to decide to drink or not. But when we talk about, the people who belong to the, very depressed socio-economic classes, then, they don't have the luxury of this debate. Then it becomes a hardcore economic issue, hardcore social issue, hardcore violence issue, hardcore issue about the future of children. So, there are some, dimensions to this whole discussion, yeah.
Govind, the example that is often quoted by opponents of prohibition is that of the US, which also toyed with prohibition in the early years of the 20th century but had to give up rather quickly. But is that really a correct comparison? Because the US, even at that time, was a far richer economy than India. So my question to you is, must the case for prohibition necessarily have some relation to the level of development in the economy? So that while there may not be a case for prohibition in a rich economy where income levels are higher and women much more emancipated, the case becomes much stronger in poor countries like India where women are undoubtedly disadvantaged. So must prohibition have some link with the level of development? Govind?
Well, I mean, the point is that I mean, certainly the level of development determines the pattern of consumption. I mean, that is fine. But at the same time, if you have a widespread bootlegging, it is the poorest of the poor who suffer more. It is not the middle classes, the upper middle classes, or the richer people who really drink the spurious liquor. It's only because the cheap liquor is something which the laborers they drink, and much of the violence is related to that. The domestic violence is related to that. Now, I mean, if it is the question of differentiating, then taxes would do the job. The point is, if you have a very high taxes, then obviously it is beyond the reach of the poor man to drink alcohol. So he is actually excluded from the system, and so the taxes will do that sort of a job. It's much more serious than that. I mean, I think, ultimately one has to see it in the way in which you enforce the thing, and way in which you eliminate the bootlegging, and whether you are really able to do it. I mean, even in the United States, I mean, as it may be in the the 20th century, they gave up as they went along, and I mean, as far as the Gujarat is concerned, I lived in Gujarat for 4 years. I have some understanding of the place, and Gujarat has always been a prosperous state. There has always been manufacturing activity there. There has always been a business-friendly environment there.
And Gujarat is one of a case by itself.
That has not been done broadly because the private sector is
private sector
is very vibrant there.
Okay. But Zakia, if you look at the entire issue, there's a clear gender link in the context of prohibition. But does this automatically make governments less serious about going ahead with it once elected, even where they have promised to do so? Because at the time of elections, they're very keen to capture the female vote bank. But once elected, they feel that they can disregard them. So is that gender link part of the reason why politicians are never very serious about implementation for all the lip service that they do? And even in the case of Bihar, it's quite possible we'll see the government do a U-turn.
Exactly, you're very right when you say that they try to sort of harness this gender link, but they really do not have a commitment to it. So they under certain political compulsions at the time of election, they begin talking about prohibition, but then they don't take it any further. And if our elected representatives and if our various governments, they understood the whole issue of equality and rights of women, if only they understood that what is it to face domestic violence the way women face it in our country and in our society, if they really understood and appreciated that, they would not be, I'm sorry to use that word, they would not be so patriarchal in their behavior, because this is more of expediency rather than real commitment to the well-being of the women in the families. So that lacuna, that gap will always remain. But I'm also quite hopeful. See, we have come at a level where the women voters are influencing the policies of the government, would-be governments and governments. So a day will come, eventually a day will come where women and women's considerations will really, dictate the policies.
With or without female reservation in parliament and state assemblies, are you hopeful that women's voice will really count, regardless of whether they get that all-important law through?
Even, that day is not far, maybe not in our generation, but in the next generation, that day is not far, where half of the parliament would comprise, women MPs, and I'm really hopeful about that.
So a day will come when we'll have responsible drinking and we don't have to think in terms of prohibition or not. But we're running out of time, Govind. So if I were to put you on the mat and ask you very quickly, are you for or against prohibition? One on economic logic and one on the larger social context. Now you have to say yes or no, and you might have to meet your drinker friends tomorrow. after having said yes or no.
Well,
so,
I
Govind,
mean,
which way is it?
When I am against prohibition in the way in which it is being administered now. Unless and until you develop a significant, if you indeed want a prohibition, you need a lot more of things about educating the public. You need to have a lot of rehabilitation centers for alcoholics. You need to really, there has to be social awareness and about things. And then of course the women need to be empowered much more. If you really empower the women much more, it will be, that would be a much better way of doing it. Certainly the alcohol should be taxed at a very, very high rate, a prohibitive rate, so that the poor have to be denied this type of things, and then bad liquor should go out of the market.
Okay.
That's basically the idea.
So clearly, Govind, you don't want prohibition, and you have a number of caveats like all good economists. But Zakia, I'll let you have the last word. Prohibition on economic grounds, prohibition on a larger social, economic, political context. Which way would you vote?
I would, to a great extent, agree with what Mr. Govinda Rao has said. I am personally not for banning of anything. So, there it interferes with my worldview that, why should anything be, why do we have to ban anything? But at the same time, we need to take into account our social realities, and especially the realities about the lives of women. And yeah, it has to be a much more, calibrated kind of, thought through kind of a policy rather than, this way or the other.
An outright ban. But I'm afraid we're completely out of time, so I'll have to end this discussion. Clearly, there are no answers to complex issues like prohibition. But hopefully, even though we haven't come to a definite answer, we've succeeded in showing that it is possible to have a dispassionate discussion on a subject as emotive as liquor. Also, that from a purely economic perspective, the benefits do outweigh the costs. Unfortunately, economics seldom gets a look in when it comes to political decisions, and the public, especially the women, are often the losers. Thank you, Govind and Zakia, for joining me in this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you also for
very
watching.
much.
Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.